James Renner, I think it's over 20 years ago. Right around then, he was writing at that time for the Cleveland Scene, and he had just put together his first book, which was called Amy, My Search for Her Killer. And I think that's around 2007, so almost 20 years ago. He's a Kent State grad, and since then, he has really dove into the world of true crime, certainly some local stories of interest, and he's even often gone into the world of sci fi. But he's also had the Porch Light Project, too, that I want to touch on, and that's getting dollars together to open up some cases that have otherwise been closed. And James, kind enough to join us in studio. As I mentioned, new book was just released on Tuesday. It is called Scout Camp: Boy Scouts of America, Sex, Death, and Secret Societies Inside the Boy Scouts of America. And I've been mentioning throughout the morning, James, this is a pretty emotional and telltale book that you put together. And if you don't mind, it has to do with some personal background. And why don't you share with us? Because this was, I imagine, difficult, emotional to put this book together for you.
It was, and first I just want to say thank you for supporting these books over the years. I can't believe it's been 20 years.
I know.
It's
I
wild.
know.
Uh, this was a very emotional book for me to put together. It's a memoir. It's true crime, but it's also a memoir, and it's about the summer I spent as a camp counselor at Seven Ranges, which is the largest Boy Scout camp in Ohio, back in 1995 when I was 17 years old. And during that summer, a counselor ended up dead under mysterious circumstances. And this book is my attempt to kind of look back at that and figure out exactly what happened and who was responsible. It's also a look at the bigger scandal within the Boy Scouts and how it led to their bankruptcy a couple years ago.
So let's get into your side of this book right away. Obviously, you were younger, 17.
Yeah.
The counselor ends up dead. You probably have questions, but maybe at that point you didn't think a whole lot about it. Maybe you did, but
Yeah.
then you went back and did investigation. So talk about a little bit about this without giving away the whole book, of course, but
Yeah.
talk about that incident.
Yeah. So this counselor was a troubled young man, and all we really knew, what we were told back in '95, was that he one night got into what a quote unquote altercation with another counselor, and then went home, and we were told he died by suicide. And then we were all pulled together a couple hours later and told it was an accident and not suicide. Now, years later, when I was working for Scene and got very good at getting public records requests, out of curiosity, I pulled the files, and the coroner at the time down in Carroll County could not determine whether it was a murder or suicide. And so I one of the things I did with this book is really go back there and try to figure out, was this a murder, or was it, and why did it happen, and how it relates to the greater abuse scandal within the Boy Scouts, because it definitely stemmed from abuse. I also uncovered, we knew it was happening at the time, but there's this secret society that operates out of Seven Ranges to this day, called Pipestone, and it had a very big part in what happened to this counselor back then.
Mm.
Just to tell you a little bit about the secret society, when I was 11 years old, the first summer I spent at Seven Ranges, I took part in this, and they take kids as young as 11 Friday nights deep into the woods at around midnight, and you were put through this ceremony. And back then it was an Indian ceremony, but of course it's a Native American ceremony. And when I was 11, I thought they were actual Native Americans, because these people jumped out with red skin and wearing nothing but loincloths, and they took us, these kids, into the woods and made you march through the woods forever. And you
Sounds traumatizing,
it really is. You end up
especially at the age of 11.
right, and they take you to the ceremonial ring where there are skulls of dead animals hanging on the trees, and you go to meet the chief, and you have to drink this bitter liquid, and if you spit it out, you have to go back through it again. And I come to find out that the liquid they make you drink is Bitrix, which is what they put in antifreeze so that kids won't drink it. It's the bitterest substance there is. And yeah, and they give you the speech. You have to get the password for the next year, which is inside a human skull. I mean, really creepy stuff that shouldn't be going on. And the one of the leaders in that Pipestone secret society is in fact responsible to a big degree for the death that happened that summer.
How now you're saying this exists? How in the world, with what people know and people talk and technology, is something like that still existing?
I This is the biggest question for me, and I hope one thing that the book does is put an end to these secret societies, because it doesn't just happen here in Ohio, but there are similar societies like the Tribe of Mikosay, which operates out of camps in Missouri. And there's 100 of these societies that have been kind of recognized by the Boy Scouts in the United States. But those are the big ones. How it still happens, I have no idea. They say that they've made it uh, you know, safer, but it's still crazy cultural appropriation. You've got middle aged men that are just wearing loincloths around these boys. There's no part in it. It shouldn't be a part of Boy Scouts.
James Renner's in our studio again, local true crime author. So many books. It all began back in 2007. His new book, again, Sex, Death, and Secret Societies Inside the Boy Scouts of America Scout Camp. You had a lot of years in Scouts. I've talked
I
to a lot
did.
of individuals who have had wonderful time in their scouting, getting to be
Hmm.
Eagle Scouts and such. But with all that said, through your investigations, through your research, how bad is it, whether it be in Ohio or beyond, when we talk about scouting?
Well, my best and worst memories are in scouting. Scouting provided me with friends, and some of the lessons I learned I still use today. But also, it put me in danger and put a lot of other kids in danger, and especially at that camp and that secret society at the time. So the Boy Scouts of America itself is it went into bankruptcy a couple years ago, and through the course of the writing the book, I got very involved in the efforts to get compensation for the abuse that happened. And what was astounding to me was the size of this scandal, and it hasn't been properly reported because a lot of they try to tie it in with what happened in the Catholic Church. But if you look at the numbers, 11,000 people sued the Catholic Church when that scandal happened. So far, 82,000 former scouts have sued the Boy Scouts of America. So this problem is exponentially greater than what happened in the Catholic Church.
You kind of answered my question through your research and investigations. You talked about the secret society here in Ohio at the camp you were at. That had to start somewhere else, I imagine. Are there secret societies in regards to outreach of scouting through your investigations elsewhere around the country?
They're all over the country. Pipestone is probably one of the bigger ones, and I think one of the reasons it's been able to go on so long is this camp is in Carroll County, and it's so far outside the jurisdiction of like major cities and sheriff's departments that it kind of flies under the radar. But there are other societies like the Tribe of Mikosay where they have their own secret things, and Pipestone is like 100 years old. It's amazing, and they hadn't changed it much until about 10 years ago. But yeah, no, there these societies that exist. One has this. One of the societies, they had this program where the kids were made to put their hands into a pail of hot ash, and then mud, and then water. And then another ceremony had the kids march all through the night until dawn, and then they would have this other ceremony. So they put the kids through some traumatic experiences.
A lot of these experiences explained in the new book, local true crime author James Renner. We say local, but really his work is read all across the country for sure. Let me ask you about this book again. Go
Yeah.
back to your personal times. Was this a book of closure? Was this a book of release? We talked about the emotions for you to put this thing together. Go down that road for
Oh
me.
yeah, it was very therapeutic. One of the things I discovered by what I had to do for this book is track down the friends that I had when I was 17 years old, who have now, one of them's living in Germany, one of them's, living in Columbus. I had to track all these people down. And what was astounding to me was how much what happened to us as teenagers still affected our lives today. Many of us suffer from, substance abuse, psychological effects, and you can trace it most back to that summer. And so it was interesting to see how some have dealt with it and some have repressed it and some don't want to talk about it. For me, it was very cathartic, and it really helped to tell the story. And yeah, it was this weight on my soul, and by getting it out there and sharing it, um, was very helpful. But if you read this book, you're gonna know more about me than maybe you you necessarily want to know. This is definitely my story.
Yeah, I can't wait to jump into this for sure. Now, listen, you have a book signing
I do.
tomorrow night, Barnes and Noble, right down the street here in Farrell. On what time? 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. Yeah, come out and get a signed book. I'm gonna read a little bit from that. I'm gonna read a passage about that pipestone ceremony. That, as a parent, if you knew your 11-year-old kid was going through this, you'd be like, "What in the world is going on? Why are they doing
Yeah.
this?" So yeah, it should be eye opening for sure.
So that's tomorrow night, Barnes and Noble, 7 o'clock. James Renner will be there, and he'll have his new book, Scout Camp, for us. A little bit about what's the latest with the Porch Light Project.
Yeah, thanks for asking about it. The Porch Light Project's doing great. We have 5 or 6 cases in the mix right now. What we do is raise money for um, cold cases in Ohio. We do DNA testing and genetic genealogy. We pay for all that, and I think we're going to have a case that I can talk about here pretty soon. That's solved out of Toledo. So I'm anxious to talk about that. And we have more cases out of Cleveland and Akron area that are in the works too. So hopefully we'll solve a handful of cases.
How are
this
you
year.
getting the dollars for that? Talk about that.
People can go online, porchlightonline.org, and donate directly there. A lot of our money comes from just individuals that donate 10, 20, $100, and that adds up over time. We work with the Akron Community Foundation people too, and private donors are a major source.
And you've had some success with the project, digging into these old
Yeah.
cold case files. Maybe give us an example of something that really, through the Porch Lights Project, you were able to get behind and get some of the answers.
Yeah, we've solved half a dozen cases so far. Sorry,
That's okay.
my favorite success story so far is
I got the cough button on
sorry.
you that time. No, that's okay.
Yeah,
Writers' nights are long, so
they
early
really are.
morning is different for
Oh
you.
yeah,
So,
I'm
yeah,
not a
we
morning
get
person.
that for sure. Go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah, right out of the gate, we helped solve the unsolved murder of Barbara Blatnick, and that was big for me. That was one of those cases I always thought maybe I'd write a book about, and to help solve it was wonderful. This teenage girl was abducted from Garfield Heights in 1987, and her body was found by Blossom Music Center. And we paid for DNA testing, genetic genealogy. They found DNA under her fingernails, and that led them to arrest a man named James Zastonic for her murder. Um, and this happened during COVID lockdown. So the courts had shut down, and they're like, what do we do with this guy? So they actually put an ankle monitor on him because he was so old. He was in early 80s, and they allowed him to live with his brother while it was working through the courts. And he ended up dying of cancer. But the fact that we were able to lead them to an arrest, and it gave the family closure that they had been looking for. So that is still my favorite case that we've worked on because it was a very famous unsolved cold case here, and we were able to bring it to conclusion. And we worked with the Cuyahoga Falls Police Department, and they were wonderful on that.
Website for the Porch Light Project?
Porchlightonline.org. You can check it out there. You can donate through there, and it's like I said, we're hoping half a dozen cases this year.
Well, James Renner has a new book as of just 2 days ago, Tuesday, Sex, Death, and Secret Societies Inside the Boy Scouts of America Scout Camp. And you heard the whole story there. Very telling, emotional book for James to put together. He's at Barnes & Noble tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, right down the street here in Fairlawn. And he's just a couple of blocks away from us right here at WAK. Hey, good. Thanks for coming in again. Always
Anytime.
appreciate you accepting the invitation
For
to
sure.
come in. And good luck with the Porch Light Project. Love everything you're doing
Oh,
for
thanks.
these families and closure, and love the work you're doing. Thanks for coming in again.
Anytime. Thank you.
There you go. Local true crime author James Renner, live in our studio, WAKR.